Hello, my name is Ilona, and in this video in my series Shadowwork, I want to talk about something someone wrote to me, and I will mention her name. It was an email where she was talking about my video about soul plan and that it is organic, which means people can decide not to follow their soul plan. And she mentioned that especially if you are in an environment and in a family growing up with people that are not working on their on their shadow work, they're not doing anything with their parents, that it's going to be very tough. So if people around you are not stepping up and not following their soul plan, it's going to be tougher for you even to step out of it or to change things. And I've noticed that myself growing up, there really wasn't anyone working with spirituality in my family or understanding what that means. So I was always told that I was asking too many questions, I was difficult, they didn't know how to handle me, because they really didn't look at themselves in that way. And of course, there were different times. I have to say that, just like when my grandparents grew up in a completely different time. But if I see some reactions I get on videos or people that sending me messages, they are from the same age as my parents or even older, and they are aware. So it would have been great if I had just one person in my environment growing up that was aware, at least working, towards awareness. That would have helped me tremendously. Now I was all by myself. And of course, that has to do with my path as well. But it's, in a way, I do understand what she was talking about. It's tougher, more difficult when you are in an environment when nobody handles their soul plan or follows it. And I also know someone in my bigger family that really never got out of the negative way of thinking. He was completely stuck in that. He never really lived the life he wanted to live. And I think he missed his soul plan. He missed listening to his intuition. He wasn't strong enough to break out of things. So he really, in a way, of course, every life is important. So I can't say that this was a lost life. I'm sure he learned things from it. But I do, in a way, feel like he had way more potential than the life that he ultimately lived, so to speak. So he died at a certain point, and he was very negative. He really was like, yeah, this life isn't for me anymore. And I also want to talk about that I actually did a card reading. I did that one in my Dutch video. That just wanted to take a look. Why are some people aware, and why some people follow their soul plan and other people don't follow their soul plan? I just thought it was interesting. What is the difference there? Besides, of course, being self-conscious. Because if you're not aware of yourself, I don't think there's anything you can start on. There's nothing to build on. So I think the ultimate first thing that is necessary if you want to grow spiritually and become aware is that you're self-aware. If you cannot look at yourself and you miss that, then I'm not even sure how you're going to become aware. You need some place to start. You need to look at yourself. Well, why am I doing this? Why am I, you have to almost put yourself in another position, like an observer looking at yourself. So I do believe that that's absolutely necessary to become aware. If people don't have that, then really there's not much you can do. But I also noticed there's a few things I want to mention. I'm just thinking about the Dutch video and what I talked about in that video. Also with family members and people in your surroundings that are very negative, unfortunately. They can really, put a number on you if you somehow, feel responsible or feel guilty. And maybe you have a mother or a grandmother or grandfather who is living by themselves, who are completely negative, that barely have any contact. So the only contact they have is you. and they expect you to show up every week, and they expect you to do things for them because they don't have anyone else, and it's all sad and horrible. Well, these people, they can actually open themselves up. They can create a life for their own, but they're not doing that. So it's very important to understand what is your responsibility and what is their responsibility. It is a choice not to make contact with people, but usually they have very negative way of thinking, very negative convictions that the world is awful and you can't trust people. So they have a tendency of isolating themselves. But it doesn't mean that they have the right to take over your life and that you are responsible for being their company just because they are not creating other people they can talk to and do things with. I just wanted to mention that as well. But the cards actually were very interesting. I got 6 cards. No, not 6 cards. I got 9 cards actually. It's very interesting. It's mostly intuitive that I pulled the cards. So I got 9 cards, and the first card is the 8 of Pentacles, the 8 of Swords, and the 9 of Swords. So my question is, what is the difference between people following their soul plan, moving ahead, and people that are not following their soul plan? The other card is the Devil, the 10 of Cups, and the Emperor. And then the last 3 is the 10 of Pentacles, the 2 of Cups, and the Page of Wands. Very interesting, the last 3, but I'm going to start with the first one because it essentially says why people are not stepping out of it. And I'm not talking probably about the people that are completely not self-aware, because like I mentioned before, there's not much you can do there. But there are people, and I've also talked to people in consultations. If, by the way, people are interested in consultations, you can find me on warekracht.nl, or you can send me a mail on warekracht@proton.com. That's proton.com. If you're interested in that. And I've noticed when I look at things with them, they ask questions, and I of course pull cards, and I feel of course along with their what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing. Usually they already know. To me, that's perfect, because really we need to start trusting our inner voice. Most of them will say, "Oh, I knew this. Deep down inside, I knew this." Especially when concerning situations or relationships that they feel they should move on from, or certain work they should leave alone. But it's tough because it will have consequences. But deep down inside, they do felt that. They knew that if I'm saying like, well, it's really time to leave, or at least that's what I'm seeing in the cards. Ultimately, it's up to everyone to make their own decisions. But then they are aware that that's a choice they make. So if they remain in the job or remain in the relationship, then they know, okay, that's my choice that I've made. But it's probably not the best option for me. But it's very interesting. So the people that they can't really follow their soul plan, they have completely this feeling of victimhood. They're stuck. They can't get out. And they're fearful, and they have all these convictions like it's not going to get any better. This is the way it is. It takes too much work. At least they have the feeling like, yeah, if it will be too much, there's no point. I'm not going to get out of it anyway. So this is really the energy of the Devil, being completely chained in your own convictions. Like you can get out. There is no way out. This is life. Usually growing up, they have certain things, convictions that they learn from their parents, maybe religious, like, how to say this, you have to work very hard, you're a sinner, you're awful, things like that. So I already mentioned this in another video, but a lot of people are afraid of life, and they don't believe that they deserve this. that they deserve a beautiful family, that they deserve abundance, that they deserve to have a job or do work that really fits with their soul. A lot of people are still, raised with this idea. No, you have to work hard, you have to do work you don't like, you have to, remain in a relationship even if you don't really feel it feels right to you. You just have to push through, don't think too much, don't feel too much, push it aside, push through. So there's this very negative energy about really truly living the life you want to live. A lot of people were brought up with the idea that they were not important, maybe emotional neglect. Of course, you have all these, you have, of course, awful things happening in your youth, and of course you have lighter ways, but it's still dysfunctional. So you can still have the idea that you don't deserve things, that you're not lovable, that you're not valuable, and in that case you are in a way fearful of life. You're like, I don't deserve this. So if something good happens, you'll make sure that you kind of sabotage it yourself, you kind of destroy it yourself, because you do what feels familiar to you. So if you're brought up in a negative mindset, that is familiar to you. If you have the feeling, I don't deserve things, I'm not lovable, people shouldn't think about me or my needs, then you will create that situation, unfortunately. So people are stuck in this situation, and not a lot of people really are prepared to step out of it. It's mostly because it takes a lot of work, essentially. If I look at my own shadow work, it's not something fun. It's not something you do in between. Especially lately, there's a lot of things coming up, and I take my time, especially in the weekend, to really work with that. Of course, there's not just the weekend. Through the week, what comes up, I work with that. But it's a lot of work in a way. It can be very overwhelming, especially if you're not used to dealing with emotions and feelings. But I'm getting better and better at it. But I do understand that for a lot of people, this is too much, especially when you are not used to dealing with emotions and feelings. It can be very overwhelming. It can be, too much in a way. So a lot of people remain in the same place because it's familiar. It's how they were brought up. And a lot of people, I've mentioned before, are so stuck on the pattern. They have this child or inner child, or part of pain, or how you look at it, a certain trauma or a certain pattern they picked up in their youth. And they're still trying to recreate it, especially when you're growing up and maybe you had a very dominant mother or father. And you've decided some way to work with that as a child. You create coping mechanisms. And your coping mechanism is to please people, to just go along with them. You most likely are going to attract a partner that's going to be very dominant. And you are, again, this piece in you, the child in you or the pain in you is like, oh, this is just like with my parents. If I'm just going to do my best and be as good as possible and just follow along, then I'm finally going to get the love from daddy or from mommy. I'm finally going to get what I want. And it's very tough to realize you're not going to get that. I've mentioned this before in the video, that it's really tough to feel through that pain and to connect with it, so that part of you is realizing it's not going to get it from the outside world. It will feel like you're empty-handed, like there's nothing there. But if you feel through it, then you can step up as adult and start giving that to your child, or to that's part in you. If it needs recognition or understanding or love, it can be all kinds of things. You can give that to that part. And if you do that, then of course the relationship, if you are in a relationship with a partner that's very similar with your parents and with a certain pattern, then things will change. It will have to change. If you change, then of course your partner or can change with you, or they're going to be more resistant, and then it's probably time to leave. And that's very tough for a lot of people to get out of, is that if they want to step out of these patterns, especially when they've been, because ultimately when, how do you say this? things will get tougher and tougher and tougher along the way. I've noticed that also in consultations when I talk to people, and I know this from my own life as well, that if you don't listen to your inner voice, then it's just going to get tougher and tougher. So if you're in a relationship and you already felt maybe in the beginning this is not right for me, and you stay around anyway because of the old pattern with, you know, your inner child or a part from the past, you stick with it, and then ultimately you maybe even get children, and it just goes, you're kind of putting yourself in this position. You're kind of just closing in, and it gets tougher and tougher to get out, because then you have children to think about, then you have a house to think about. How am I going to step away from this? And that's a lot of fear, that people don't want to step out of this, and they stay stuck, and they get themselves more and more stuck. Like I've mentioned, a family member, you know, grandfather or grandma, it just gets older and older and more negative, and they push people away, and they are not open for new contact, so they'll be more isolated, and they create a life that is very limited in a way, but it's their own creation. So this has to do with people that do not want to listen to their inner voice and are too afraid, and the more they get stuck, you know, the more difficult it gets to get out, because you're going to get resistance if you are going to step out. If you're suddenly going to put up boundaries with someone you've been married with for like 30 years, yeah, that other person, it will be interesting how the other person is going to react. Or you're suddenly going to change things in your family, with family members, or with friendships, or with a job. That can cause a lot of things. Resistance in yourself, obviously. If you haven't dealt with the shadow side, that's going to be triggered, because you're going to leave the familiar, so that part in you that's holding on to that is going to come up, and it's like, what's going on here? And of course your environment will react to it. Now the last three cards are very interesting. We have the Ten of Pentacles, the Two of Cups, and the Page of Wands. And this is, to me, we all deserve abundance, stability, a family, work that we love. It's about healing, looking at those dark parts, looking at those things inside of ourselves, and really deal with it. Listen to our inner voice. So important. A lot of us feel that, but we ignore it, we deny it. I even had that before I started doing videos. At least 3 or maybe even 4 months, I walked around with, oh, I really want to do this. I really want to do this. But I was like, no, I was in this, like, oh, that's how am I going to do this? And I just got scared and anxiety, and I don't want to do this. But I did. Obviously, I've started with videos. But first of all, I could have started sooner. As soon as I had this feeling, I could have started with those videos. But I could also never have listened to it. Where would I have been now then if I never started these videos and never started this life? Because it completely changed my life. I have a completely different life than I had before making the videos. So it's very interesting, but I felt it inside, and ultimately I listened to it. So that's why it's so important. If you feel a certain thing, of course, there's going to be resistance, especially if you're going to move against a pattern in yourself. If you really want to become, you feel like you're happier in another job, or maybe in another relationship, or just in another part of the world, follow that. It's there for a reason. And yes, you're going to have, resistance coming up. And that's why it's important to do the shadow work, so you can really feel through that and start working towards your stability, healing, and most importantly, follow your intuition. And how do you know when it's your intuition and not something else? Your intuition makes you happy, makes you calm. So if you make a decision that makes you calm, or just makes you happy, makes you excited, that's your intuition. So if you decide something and doesn't feel right, or there's some doubt, that is not your intuition, and then it's time to look further what's going on there. I'd like to leave it at this, and I hope to see you in another video. Bye.